Early one spring morning in 2020, with the UK still in the grip of the first coronavirus lockdown, a white delivery van pulled up outside a semi-detached house in the Yew Tree area of West Derby, a suburb in Liverpool. Inside the vehicle were 4 men, 3 high-level drug dealers, brothers Jason and Craig Cox, and notorious career criminal Richard Caswell, as well as low-level henchman Benjamin Monks-Gorton. The group were heavily armed with axes and machetes. This was no ordinary break-in. Their target was a stash house on Croxdale Road West, used by one of the biggest crime groups in Merseyside, belonging to a gang that had supplied the 3 dealers with wholesale quantities of cocaine. The Cox brothers had done their homework. They had identified the stash house by placing a tracker on a courier's car and having it followed. They knew the group they were about to rob were a serious criminal outfit, and there would be serious retaliation if they were found out. The stakes were high. The robbery nearly went to plan. You are watching OCG TV. Before we begin the first chapter, we're proud to introduce our first video sponsor, our friends over at MyHeritage. MyHeritage is a worldwide leading family history service. It's fun and extremely easy to build your family tree and discover your origins. And you might also find new relatives you didn't know about. That is exactly what happened to me when I started building my family tree through the brilliant Instant Discoveries feature, which leverages the entire database of MyHeritage to allow you to add up to 50 people to your family tree at the click of a button. This specific feature led to the discovery of the identity of my great-great-grandmother, who until now I was unaware of. I was able to bring this photograph of her to life. It was amazing to be able to see what she looked like all those years ago. You can take advantage of the software within MyHeritage to enhance, repair and animate old family pictures, which produces exceptional results for historical photos. MyHeritage puts over 19 billion records at your fingertips. They even managed to find a registration document for the First World War that belonged to my great-grandfather, which dates back to 1917. Truly fascinating. So sign up for a 14-day free trial today and enjoy all the fantastic features that MyHeritage has to offer. You can find the link within the video description below. Now, let's begin the first chapter. Chapter 1. Smash and Grab. It was Monks-Gorton who was nominated to make the first move, approach the front door in a high-vis jacket with a surgical mask covering his face to pose as a delivery driver. That ruse proved unnecessary as the door was already open and the gang rushed inside. They were faced with a stunned father and son and launched a savage attack. The older occupant was severely wounded, almost losing his arm, which was slashed down to the bone. The gang had arrived at the property at 9:24 in the morning and needed only 4 minutes to take what they came for, leaving at 9:28. At around 9:30 a.m, the son called 999 and frantically tried to explain that his dad had just been stabbed and that there was blood everywhere. What the 2 victims did not mention was the fact that the attackers had left the scene with a bag containing around 30 kilograms of cocaine worth around £1 million, the criminal property of their fearsome bosses. In the following hours, the OCG began to arrange the distribution of the stolen drugs as they travelled back towards Warrington, with courier Michael Nevin instructed to deliver 10 kilos to a fellow Manchester-based gang. Messages also sent via EncroChat showed Jason asking older brother Lee Cox, who did not attend the robbery, if he wanted some of the loot. The messages between the Cox brothers and their henchmen showed a mix of trepidation and bravado about the seemingly successful heist. Jason Cox, asking one of his henchmen, Michael Nevin, to move their share of the stolen cocaine, demanded silence. No doubt because the slightest whisper of what had happened and that the Coxes had been involved would have dire consequences. Jason Cox also asked his brother Lee Cox whether he would help him rent a flat in case the Liverpool group worked out they were behind the robbery. However, he also displayed a different side to his personality, claiming he was more than willing to empty a clip into the faces of their opposite number. Caswell was also playing a dangerous game. As the Liverpool firm desperately tried to work out who had ripped them off, they asked him directly for information. They informed him that they had managed to get CCTV of the van and of a grey Audi used by Jason Cox to spy on the stash house in the days before the robbery. Caswell played dumb and said he would ask around, but passed on what they had told him to Jason Cox. The brothers discussed what to do next, eventually agreeing to take their chances. They knew that Monks-Gorton had dropped his surgical mask during the attack, but felt there was little chance of him being recognised as he was from out of town. Jason and Lee Cox and Richard Caswell split the proceeds of the raid in half between them. Cox sold on their share of the spoils to Leon Atkinson, a notorious drug dealer and associate of cop killer Dale Cregan. Couriers linked to Cox and Atkinson met near Manchester City's training ground on 2 occasions to organise the handover. The password agreed between them was decided as Man City. The sale was made and money exchanged. Things seemed to be going just right. Chapter 2. The Likely Lads. 21 years ago, 2 brothers hit the headlines when they were banned from parts of Salford. An exasperated city council took action, and antisocial behaviour orders, introduced a few years earlier by PM Tony Blair, were slapped on Craig and Jason Cox, aged 12 and 15. Magistrates heard how the pair had brought misery to people living in Broughton and Blackfriars for over a year. To get their message across, the council successfully applied for reporting restrictions to be lifted at court so the brothers could be named. Jason had been identified as being in a mob of youths throwing missiles at fire crews as they dealt with a burning car. Craig caused mayhem at his school, intimidating teachers and pupils, and was seen with a replica gun at Broughton Recreation Centre. The stance by the council failed in diverting the brothers' path to a life of crime. Years before Kirkdale native Richard Caswell became a notorious Underworld villain, his neighbours thought of him as one of the quieter guys in the neighbourhood. He was later described by a judge as one of the most polite clients I have ever met in 30 years of practice. But behind his low-key exterior, Caswell possessed a seemingly endless appetite for risk and a cold ruthlessness. He first hit headlines when he was charged over an extraordinary underworld feud between club owners in the city. Unlike the usual tit-for-tat shootings or arson attacks, this clubland row involved powerful car bombs fashioned from industrial fireworks stuffed into cheap, stolen motors, exploding across the city in 2003 and 2004. The court heard Caswell was not initially involved, but offered his services after the first explosion outside the popular 051 club in the city centre on September 2003. Caswell had a grudge against the then owner of the club, John Lynch, after Mr. Lynch sacked him from working as a doorman due to an assault charge. While the gang kept their fingers crossed that the fearsome group they had robbed did not suspect them, the police already had a head start on both sides, thanks to the now infamous EncroChat hack. Chapter 3. EncroChat spells the end. The Coxes had thought that they had got away with it, but in June 2020, the encrypted communication their gang had been using was cracked. They'd been using the phones as part of a determined effort to avoid detection, but the cross-border hack of the EncroChat server in France, as well as the work of undercover police officers, brought down the gang, as police were able to read their messages. The EncroChat messages shared by all the main players clearly outlined their roles in the heist. That information showed how Caswell first suggested the bold plan of ripping off his own suppliers. The group agreed to look at the plan, making inquiries to understand the price the rival group was selling for. They were told £41,000 and that it would have to be picked up from Liverpool. Caswell arranged to sell some of the Liverpool gang's cocaine to a buyer and then tail the delivery man back to the stash house. The EncroChat messages shared by all the main players clearly outlined their roles in the heist. Jason Cox had adopted the names Novabelt and Urban Rifle on EncroChat. Craig Cox also used Novabelt and Lee Cox Marine Ivory. The group began to initiate steps to undertake professional planning. They attached trackers to vehicles, went on a number of reconnaissance visits at the stash house, and debated when was best to strike. In the messages recovered from EncroChat, Caswell describes his disdain for their target, describing them as horrible but ruthless. He added, "If we get his driver, do you think he will be the man with access to gaff with all of it in there? I would even be up for killing him if needs be." The pair discussed whether the Liverpool firm would be wary of tracking devices, to which Caswell confirmed, "Yes, they've been at it for years. If they suspected us, they would want to put us on lie detector. We need to be spot on with this." The high-risk nature of the plot was not lost on them. Describing the Liverpool gang, Caswell said, "These lot proper smash it." Police worked out from the messages between them that they used a storage unit in Bury. They also identified Michael Nevin as the main courier for the Coxes, who had a flat in Fallowfield. Nevin's flat was raided and £30,000 in cash was found, and he was discovered hiding in his cellar. At the storage unit, they found 3/4 of a kilo of cocaine, scales, and a money counter. The stamp on the 3/4 of a kilo of drugs was the same as the drugs that had been stolen from the Liverpool OCG. Police arrested Craig Cox at his home address, but his brother Lee and Jason and Richard Caswell went on the run. They later arrested Caswell in a £1 million rented apartment in Centurion Building at Chelsea Bridge Wharf near the Thames, close to Battersea Power Station in London. In the apartment, police found £98,000 in cash in a hold-all. On August 4, 2020, Monks-Gorton was located in the Village Hotel in Bury. Almost another year would pass before the two Cox brothers were arrested on 6th of July 2021 in Alicante by Spanish police. They were spotted in a car with two other Salford men, and a chase ensued. When the Spanish police struck their hired car, they tried to ram their way out and were eventually arrested. The brothers were held in custody in the notorious Fontcalent prison in Alicante. However, they were later moved to Madrid after ropes and saw blades were discovered in a cell, suggesting plans were afoot to escape. The fallout when the facts became known was seismic in the underworld. Arson attacks at properties linked to the Cox family were reported to Greater Manchester Police, while Caswell was slashed whilst on remand at HMP Manchester. Police believe that the brothers are one of the main crime families in the Manchester area. While it has not been heavily reported in the past about the city's A-team and anti-A-team, the Cox family did not need to take sides in that dispute because they have been able to survive in their own entity. The Cox clan were not flash with their ill-gotten gains. There were no lavish houses or cars. They were committing a level of criminality that allowed them to live a nice lifestyle, but not a lavish one. Jason had moved out of the area to Warrington, and Craig and Lee were still within Salford, living in reasonable properties. It's understood that from EncroChat messages they were storing large amounts of money at family members' houses, and that the robbery was the big payday. Their criminal enterprise will need to be reset, as they were put away. All the men will have to serve a minimum of 2/3 of their sentence due to the severity of their offending. The investigation was part of Operation Venetic, the nationwide crackdown led by National Crime Agency into the criminal use of EncroChat is the UK's biggest ever law enforcement operation. Well over 200 people have now been detained by Greater Manchester Police since the launch of Operation Venetic by the NCA in July 2020, and more than 150 of those have subsequently been charged for a range of drug, firearms and money laundering offences. The identity of members of the Liverpool outfit they targeted cannot be revealed due to legal reasons. Monks-Gorton was jailed for 6 years and 9 months for his part in the robbery conspiracy. Michael Nevin, 35, a courier who described himself as a gangster transporter for the tight-knit Cox gang, was sentenced to almost 10 years in prison. Jason Cox was ordered to serve 14 years and 8 months, while Craig Cox was sentenced to 13 years and 6 months in jail after both pled guilty to conspiracy to supply cocaine and cannabis, conspiracy to possess criminal property, and conspiracy to commit robbery. Lee Cox was sentenced to 8 years for admitting conspiracy to supply cocaine and cannabis and conspiracy to possess criminal property. Richard Caswell received 7 years for conspiracy to supply cocaine and diamorphine, possessing criminal property, and conspiracy to commit robbery.